at the end of all this, you need Zelensky to agree to whatever Trump is proposing. And I don't think there's any sign that Zelensky is going to agree to any of this.
As I am with my current guest, which is James Coney, news project editor at the Sunday Times. Hello, James.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, thank you very much.
Yeah, you well? You good?
Yeah, I feel like the world is waking up from Easter suddenly, and all of a sudden, fresh chaos has...
Well, they're waking up from Easter and starting to do winter again by the looks of things, but dear me. Look, let's crack on, lots to cover. America's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the US equivalent of Foreign Secretary, of course, was due to come to London today to talk about peace in Ukraine, but he's now pulled out, citing logistical issues. Who knew there were logistical issues with peace in Ukraine? Another American diplomat who suddenly found he's washing his hair is Donald Trump's leader, envoy Steve Witkoff. These talks are going to go ahead at a lower level. They're likely to cover Washington's peace plan, which includes recognising parts of Ukraine annexed by Russia as officially Russian. James, this was meant to be the big week for Ukraine's future, but it all seems to be falling apart, and it's only Tuesday.
Yeah,
Wednesday.
I think that, I think what's most important about this is the mood music, isn't it? That what Donald Trump has been saying overnight is that he expects Ukraine to give up land. You can promise Putin whatever you want, but what really matters is what Ukraine are prepared to tolerate. I mean, presumably the diplomats think there's no point getting in a room together to try and thrash something out until you can have the nitty-gritty of what actually something may look like, because we know what the theory is. In fact, when I was in here last, probably 3 weeks ago, we were more or less having the same conversation about the fact that what everybody seems to be tiptoeing around is this idea that Ukraine may have to get up land. Now, what Donald Trump seems to be proposing overnight is Ukraine giving up what roughly equates, the FT calculates to, is to about a fifth of their land mass.
If they were going to give up land, they might as well not have had a war in the first place. I mean, it seems just to be so incredibly Donald Trump. His understanding of a good deal is one in which he gets what he wants, and whatever implications it has for anybody else is just incredibly secondary. Look, we're also joined by the Times' defence editor, Larisa Brown. Larisa, good morning.
Good morning.
How much should we read in, Larisa, to these senior US figures, Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, pulling out of these talks at the last minute?
Well, I mean, yesterday was extremely confusing because the Foreign Office were going to give us this press release about the plans for peace and detailed discussions, and then it never came, and then it emerged that the two key US figures had pulled out. Now, I think it's fair to say that obviously this is one sign that the Americans don't really believe that the Europeans have something important to say at this point. The meetings that are going to be taking place later in the week, Witkoff potentially meeting Putin, are going to be the real, where all the action happens, the real potential game changers. Now, obviously, at the end of all this, you need Zelensky to agree to whatever Trump is proposing. And I don't think there's any sign that Zelensky is going to agree to any of this.
I mean, Witkoff, as you said, is going to Moscow for I think it's his fourth meeting with the Russians. He still hasn't met the Ukrainians. That seems to tell its own story in a way, doesn't it?
It does, and there's a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians to agree to give up some sort of land, whether that's Crimea or the rest of the eastern territories that they've already got hold of. And as James said, that's about 20% of Ukraine. But it's not clear what the Russians are going to have to give up, which is quite extraordinary. But Zelensky is going to be put in this impossible situation because Trump has threatened to basically end all of these peace talks if there's no deal sort of forthcoming. Now, Zelensky will then have to decide, does he agree, or does he face the prospect of America potentially withholding weapons or intelligence and dropping the whole support altogether?
How realistic is it, and has it ever been, that Ukraine could actually win back Crimea?
I think, probably unrealistic at the moment, totally unrealistic without Europe, the US, other countries significantly increasing their weapons. And of course, especially Europe, they're running out of the kit to send to Ukraine. At the moment, the Russians are continuing to take more territory every day. The progress has been slowing, but they are continuing to make advances. And that's at the moment. So obviously, if the Americans walked back, then they're not going to be able to take back significant territory. They're going to lose it.
Yeah, look, it's been suggested that one of the reasons why the White House is trying to move fast on this, although obviously not turning up to a meeting is an odd way to move fast, is to get an agreement in place before Donald Trump marks 100 days in office next week. Does that seem likely that this kind of thing is a factor?
Yes, I think so. I mean, that's 7 days' time, end of April, it'll be 100 days that Trump spent in office. And obviously, he cares about his reputation. You know, he did say originally that he was going to solve this, I think, within a few hours of him becoming president. He's not achieved that. But obviously, he wants all of this wrapped up. He doesn't want to be having to deal with this for months on end, which is probably what would have to happen.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Larisa, while we've got you, there's another defence story we wanted to speak to you about, because the Veterans Minister Al Carnes has suggested that Britain should be prepared to deploy armed drones that could identify and strike targets without the need for human involvement. This is your story. What did he say exactly?
Well, he was tweeting about his thoughts on the effectively on the upcoming defence review and the need for drones. And quite controversially, he did suggest that, you know, in the future we could see these drones the armed drones operating on their own accord and striking targets. Now that is actually not what the government policy is at the moment. You know, he was saying that we should embrace it, but actually the Ministry of Defence says we wouldn't have that kind of policy where armed drones could act on their own accord. So it's quite an interesting topic and one that's clearly interested our readers this morning.
I mean, it used to be controversial enough that you'd get piloted drones, and we were wondering whether it was right for people to sort of launch strikes when they were so far away from the action. Have these kinds of this kind of automated weaponry, has that been used anywhere? Is there anywhere that uses it?
There is. I mean, in practical terms, like air defense systems would have to react so quickly to incoming missiles that there isn't a human in the loops telling them that they have to fire at that particular missile that's coming in. So we have got automated systems, but of course, the UK advocating for drones that are going to kill humans without a human in the loop is a major step forward.
Yeah, it's all a bit Robocop, isn't it? Larisa Brown, thank you very much indeed. Larisa is the Times' defence editor. James Coney is still with me. What do you think? Automated drone warfare? I mean, are you keen?
This is I mean, all part of. We've got this strategic defence review coming up very soon, and a lot of the discussions are about how we can build a military force in this country that is kind of a real move away from the kind of way that we've had a military force since the end of the Second World War. And it's all about how we cope with this underwater threat that we have. So increasingly looking at how we protect ourselves beneath the seas, but also in the skies. And, you know, we saw last week, there was a great story in the Times last week about the future of this. I mean, while we're busy trying to build drones that will kill automatically without a human being in the loop, we're also developing technology that will just knock drones straight out of the sky by radio waves. So you've got this kind of behind-the-scenes arms race of people trying to counter technology which hasn't even come out yet, which is how fast this arms race is moving. You only need a big international crisis like Ukraine that focuses the attention on defence and warfare, and suddenly you see these huge advantages in it. And we're at this important moment, and you know, debates like this that Al Cairns has been raising and Larisa's broken in a story today are really a fundamental part of that.
Well, you go back only, 15 years to the Cameron government, and how much debate there was about how many aircraft carriers we used to have, and, you know, how important various sorts of jets were. And the fact that 15 years is not a long time in procurement. It takes a long time longer than that to plan and build a nuclear submarine, for example. And the fact that we're now talking about suitcase-sized things that sort of run themselves, or indeed perhaps don't, depending on what we throw at them.
And jets are incredibly expensive and incredibly vulnerable and take a lot of resource to man and to train pilots. I mean, one of the kind of areas of future gazing that the government is currently looking at with the Strategic Defence Review is this idea that you could have a swarm of drones going in ahead of advance of any kind of foot soldiers that would basically clear the way, making it safer. I mean, this is a huge development. I mean, and, you know, philosophically, I think we're going to have to try and figure out where we sit on this.
Yeah, absolutely.